Hi, my name is Stefan Esser with restorehealthusa.com. Welcome to our first edition of Doc in a Box. Today I want to talk about the #1 cause of blindness, kidney failure, and amputation in America. That's right, type 2 diabetes. And over the last 30 years, we've seen a nearly tripling in the number of type 2 diabetics in America. In fact, more than 90% of all diabetes at large is of the type 2 variation. Today I'm going to discuss a little bit about what happens in the body. Not only what the basic anatomy is, but the physiology, pathophysiology, so that you can understand better what you can do to prevent your risk of type 2 diabetes in the future and or reverse your type 2 diabetes if you already have the diagnosis. Let's start out by taking it to the board. Here's my very poor rendition of a human structure. This is a person right here showing some of their anatomy that's associated with digestion. In particular, the esophagus descending down from the mouth, the stomach that you can appreciate here, and the small intestines that it connects into, going into the large intestines that ends up bringing stool out of the body. Wrapped up in the midst of all of this anatomy is a small organ, one that we call the pancreas. I'm circling it right there for you. Maybe you can zoom in a little bit and you can see this little organ, how close it is to the intestines, the stomach, etc. It's also very close to the kidneys, the liver, the gallbladder, and other parts of anatomy that I didn't draw on this picture. So, zooming back out again, the pancreas is the most important organ, if you will, or so we've always thought, for sugar management, for sugar control. In particular because of its release of a hormone that we call insulin. Now, insulin is not the only hormone that's associated with sugar control, but perhaps the most important, or at least the one that we can control the most, and thus the one that we look at the most with regards to how a type 2 diabetic's sugar control is. So, how does insulin work? Most of us don't know. Today I want to briefly talk about how insulin does its job. So, work with me here. Imagine a road, and on this road there are a bunch of houses. These houses have gates or little kind of walkways entering in, and each one of them does, like I said, have a gate on it, a gate here. Well, these cells, pardon me, I already gave it away. These houses, or these boxes on my drawing, represent the cells in your body. Any cell, pick one. Your skin, your liver cells, your muscle cells, your bone cells. And this road represents a blood vessel. So, there's a blood vessel. And this blood vessel carries nutrition, oxygen, all of the things that your body needs. In particular, it carries glucose, or better known as sugar. So, glucose is the energy of the cell. Just like a house needs electricity in order to keep the lights on and the pump running, etc., your cells require glucose or sugar to function, to work. Now, as you would imagine, this sugar gets carried in the blood vessels and it needs to get into the cell, into the house to do its job. Now, here's where insulin comes in, because you see, insulin is a gatekeeper. Insulin has the key. Insulin goes up to this gate, binds to it. This gate represents a receptor on a cell. And it opens that gate up, allowing sugar, or glucose, to go inside. And now it can do its job. Now in the type 1 diabetic, which is, again, fewer than 5% of all diabetes cases, those are individuals who lack any insulin. In other words, their pancreas either doesn't work at all or negligibly works. As a result, they are insulin dependent, meaning they require a shot of insulin in order to get insulin into the bloodstream and to allow sugar into the cell. Now let's do a little experiment. Imagine that there is no insulin. Well, what happens? The more sugar you eat, the more sugar builds up in the bloodstream. And again, this is where we end up with diabetes. As I mentioned with type 1 diabetes, you have no insulin produced at all. However, in type 2 diabetes, it's a very different picture. And that's what we're going to talk about now, because that's one we can do an incredible amount about. So imagine this being a person. It's a bad drawing, I know. They're lying on their back, and that's their belly. They've got a little poochity pooch, don't they? A little belly sticking out. And this belly, unfortunately, All this is fat, what we call visceral adiposity. Viscera refers to all the organs. Adipose means fat. So visceral adiposity, or apple fat, or belly fat, is what this is. Unfortunately, belly fat doesn't just sit there and jiggle. Belly fat is very physiologically active. In fact, it releases hormones. I'm going to call them X, Y, and Z. But they are hormones such as cytokines, pro-inflammatory cytokines, in fact, IL-6, TNF-alpha, and the rest. But what they do is they go up to the cell and they block the gate. They get in the way of insulin doing its job to open up the gate. As a result, the body says, oh, I must not have enough insulin because I can't open this gate. What happens? The body says, well, I've got to produce more insulin. So it starts producing more and more insulin. For a while, that's enough insulin to overcome the blockade of that gate. But over time, the body produces more and more and more of these blocks. These blockades, these, what I think about some bouncers at a bar who say, nope, you can't come in here. And they're blocking the way of insulin opening up that door and letting sugar inside. So over time, the body's pumping out all this insulin. The pancreas is working double, triple, quadruple shifts, and it's just cranking out the insulin. In fact, for the first 10 years before someone becomes a diagnosed diabetic, if you test their fasting insulin levels, they are dramatically elevated, up to 10 times higher than the average Joe. Well, as you would imagine, a plant that's working at full frequency, triple shifts, on, can't do that forever. And in time, the pancreas gets tired, gets worn out. Body says, I just can't do it anymore. And little by little, there's not enough insulin to meet the demands of the body. And what happens? The sugar goes up and up and up and up. And before you know it, you have all of the side effects of diabetes. Suddenly you're peeing more frequently than you thought. All of a sudden you're losing weight rapidly, which is the opposite of what you would expect. It's in the end stages. All of a sudden you're having kidney problems and you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So that is the basic physiology of what occurs. So in your mind you should be saying, so what do we do about that? What's the answer? Well, all too often in the medical tradition, what we do is we give you drugs. We start out with something called metformin. Many of you are probably familiar with that. It's the most commonly used medication for early diabetes. And what that does is it says to the pancreas, hey, produce a little bit more for me. Give me a little more insulin, will you? And it increases the sensitivity of that insulin here. Makes it a little more functional. But over time, it stops working as well. So we increase your dose. But more than 80+% of all type 2 diabetics who start on metformin within less than 5 years are on insulin. So we know that it's not a very effective medicine. And why is it not effective? Well, the main reason is it's not addressing the real problem. It hasn't taken care of this, which is the primary cause of type 2 diabetes in America today. The greater your visceral adiposity, the greater your belly fat is, the greater your risk of type 2 diabetes. In fact, in Framingham Heart Study, one of the largest continuing studies, they found that a person who is obese increases their risk, or pardon me, if they're overweight, they increase the risk of type 2 diabetes by 300%. And if they're obese, they increase their risk of type 2 diabetes by 900%. So there's no magic here. But what I want to give you is the knowledge to understand, why does my loved one have type 2 diabetes? Why do I have type 2 diabetes? And then what can I do about it? If this is the cause, if that visceral or belly fat is the problem, the answer isn't more medications. The answer isn't more procedures. The answers are not in high-tech innovations. They are in simple, low-tech things, such as losing that weight. How? By beginning to put the right fuel into your bodies, by giving it what it needs to get well. If you have any questions or comments, post them below. Let us know what you think, what other issues you'd like to see addressed or talk about. Let us know if this video is helpful.